Hello and welcome back to the IrishRacing.com YouTube channel. I'm your host, Emma Nagle, hosting this week's Irish Angle as Vincent Finnegan is off sunning himself in Spain somewhere, I think. So it's just myself and Johnny this week, unfortunately. But Johnny, we've got a fair bit to talk about, I suppose. Epsom Derby, the big one over the weekend. Some other news, Colin Keane getting his job at Juddmonte. A couple of big absentees for the start of the flat season as well, we'll chat about later on. But I suppose first off, I think we kind of wanted to start the show. I think last week we were the big main point of discussion, the Redwood Queen incident at Wexford, and a bit of a slating in the comments on that one. I think, Johnny, you wanted to add a little bit more to the whole thing.
Yeah, you start showing me by saying, unfortunately, Vinny's not here. And I gathered from my 3 days at Listowel talking to people that Vinny is very much respected by people because he's perceived to kind of tell it as he is. And he's able to, I suppose, he doesn't go racing that much and you wouldn't have two interviews, and Vinny has that, like, I'm going to say what I think type attitude, and that's endearing. And you should never maybe look at comments about stuff you do online, but to be fair, we get a lot of good comments. And I did know I was criticised last week for being on the gravy train and stuff like that in relation to my commentary around Redwood Queen. And if you are a journalist in racing, it is difficult, and I'm not great with confrontation in the first place, so it is difficult to talk to people and at the same time maybe say stuff that they're not happy about. But ultimately, that is kind of your job as well. And just in relation to the gravy train, the point I'd like to make about Philip and Charles Burns is that I couldn't get either to talk in the stall, so there was no gravy coming my way in relation to that. And if I were maybe a bit, dancing around the subject last week just on Redwood Queen, I have written an article on it which I hope will explain my point better, which hasn't been published yet. But and also there were other comments in relation to me quoting my mate's article. Well, that was actually Mark Costello's article in the Irish Field, which I would implore anyone to read because I thought it was a vital piece of information. And just on this, it did kind of annoy me a bit because some of the criticism of what I said on the podcast last week was ultimately very valid, and criticism that has merit will kind of affect you. And if anyone is, under the impression that I was on the gravy train in relation to Redwood Queen, you have to be conscious of the legal parameters of doing a podcast like this. And if you want to come on and on a national podcast and say whatever you want, go ahead, but you won't be long being found out. And just in relation to Redwood Queen, I think it was absolutely an awful look for Irish racing, whatever happens from it. And the reverberations are still going on. Even speaking to someone this morning, he was very, very worried about just how bad Irish racing looks from stuff like this, regardless of what you think happened, and how ultimately, worrying it is in the context of fallen betting turnover and the negativity around racing. And this might lead us as well, Emma, to the Derby this weekend because of racing's place in the overall picture. There's very little media coverage of it. That's been pointed out, and ultimately a very disappointing crowd at Epsom as well. But I just wanted to point that out. I was probably rightly called out a bit last week, and I think Redwood Queen was appalling to look at, basically in terms of optics, and we'll see what comes out of it. And I hope the IHRB gets to the bottom of what happened.
Sure, it's being looked into anyway. At least, look, we've got that one straightened out. I know you were kind of making a bit of a segment into the Derby. I suppose it's the logical next place to go with the show. Lambourne, Aidan O'Brien's 11th winner in the Epsom Classic. I suppose textbook ride by Wayne Lorden, riding the best there in the field, and he stayed home strongly. What did you make of the Derby this year?
Yeah, I have a bit of an irrational aversion to stallions in some respects, in that, like, I honestly couldn't really see Australia breeding a Derby winner. He's standing for, he's not a sire that has maybe been, most sires aren't. They don't really deliver on their promise, I suppose. And Australia has gotten, the likes of Broome, and he's gotten good horses. But I think he's standing for 10 grand now. So that's kind of where he's at. And I was surprised that he'd be able to get a horse good enough to win the Derby. But that's irrational as well. He was a Derby winner himself with an amazing pedigree. And Lambourne's an interesting subject in terms of his own pedigree because he's a bit of mix of speed and stamina. But I was probably a little bit dismissive of Lambourne going into the race, and as much as it was a big field for the Derby, it didn't look like a vintage renewal. It looked like a very interesting renewal. We had the Guineas form not really tested because of obviously the late defection of the Guineas form in the race ruling court. But for me, the race was a lot of it was about Wayne Lorden, to be honest. I don't know what you thought, Emma, but like just he was riding a horse that if you can get on the front end at Epsom, relative to the mess of the race that Delacroix was and how it just never worked out at all for him, if you can get a horse in the front end who's not going mad fast, you're in a very advantageous position. It's almost like the equivalent of riding maybe around like Bellewstown or something like that in Ireland. It's a very unique track. And Wade Norden rode the horse as if he was on a stair. To me anyway, but that can get a jockey into a bad situation in the sense that he's not quick enough to do this, so I have to be flat out on him. And to me, it looked like he really got it right. And I was at the Curragh when Wayne Lorden looked like he had what could have easily been a career-ending injury in the Derby a couple of years ago, and for him to come back and win the Derby, for me, it's real testament to his quality as a rider, and also, he just battled back. Silently, I suppose, behind the scenes, he was out for months and months and months trying to get back. I felt it was a really, really good ride. I'm not sure if this is going to be a vintage Derby. I'm not sure how many of these are going to come out and go on to better things. But I thought, for me anyway, the narrative around the race, as much as Aidan won it again and he won the Oaks, was Wayne Lorden.
Yeah, for sure. I think everyone watching it was delighted to see Wayne coming home in front there. Look, I kind of agree. I'd maybe question a little bit. A few of the big guns kind of disappointed. The Line of Winter, Delacroix didn't really show up on the day. I was looking forward to seeing Ruling Court running as well. He was probably my fancy for the race, but when the rain fell, they pulled him out of that, which kind of took a little bit of the shine off it, maybe a small bit. Yeah, a few of the ones in behind kind of finishing in a bit of a pile as well. So look, I don't know, but definitely brilliant to see Wayne get done. And like you were saying about Australia, like he's by a Derby winner, who's by a Derby winner who are all trained by Aidan O'Brien, like Galileo, all the way down to Australia. He's trained 3 generations of Derby winners. It's incredible to think of it, really. Coming up like that. But I suppose to talk about a few of the more disappointing ones, I actually thought it was really interesting, the comments from Aidan O'Brien afterwards on the Line in Winter and Delacroix. You kind of touched on Delacroix. He kind of got a bit of a nightmare passage around there. He was being shuffled around early on in the race. He was a bit keen. The Line in Winter, similar enough story as well. But I just thought it was interesting, not a talk maybe about how the Derby is maybe not as prestigious to some as it once was. But I thought Aidan's comments saying that, the Line in Winter is probably now a miler and Delacroix is a 10 furlong horse, but they like to use the Derby as, the ultimate test of the thoroughbred. Do you still think that's something that's maybe dying out in racing? I just thought it was kind of interesting to hear Aidan saying that.
Yeah, like I don't know where I read it might have been somewhere in the Racing Post. I don't know, as Lee Motto said in relation to Ruling Court, and he sort of said, well, if he were owned by Coolmore, they just would have run him. And I thought that was an interesting take. And you've seen in recent years, and it's kind of weird, even when you compare it to some of the national hunt trainers, like when you look at Lake Victoria last year, this is a really refreshing thing. And like, people can knock the influence of like a superpower in racing and the commercial kind of aspect to running the likes of Coolmore. But like Coolmore and Aidan O'Brien, they really do run their horses. And Aidan's comments were interesting. Aidan has backed the Derby left, right, and centre for years and years and years. And like Lambourne won the Derby on Saturday. Like Lambourne winning the Derby as a stallion, for example, like Lambourne is going to stand for small money if you were retired right now. It's just as simple as that. Winning the Derby does not make most Derby winners do not become good sires or great sires or anything like that. So it's not like the race is necessarily this pathway to massive kind of commercial a commercial boon afterwards. But for whatever reason, and Aidan has spoken about this in recent years, they like their embryo sires to have proven themselves to the hardships of racing, and they're ultimately not afraid for horses to get beaten. We saw that with Lake Victoria, who clearly was undercooked going into Newmarket, but they thought it was worth bringing her over with the view to the next race. They like their sires being tested, and for the Line in Winter to run and get that test into his kind of, I suppose, his CV was interesting. And Aidan's comments afterwards were intriguing. Like, you looked at the likes of Baid, he was probably more of as much as he got a mile and two, he was more of a miler than a mile and a half horse. And See the Stars can get some pretty sharp horses. And the Line in Winter, if he could bounce back in a proper mile race and become a very good miler, he would very much restore himself in terms of his own reputation and potentially his own stallion credentials. And Aidan wouldn't have any sons of See the Stars, or Coolmore wouldn't have any sons of See the Stars themselves, I would imagine. And Delacroix, for me, he didn't. I actually put up Tennessee Stud in the Derby, thinking he might reverse form with Delacroix, because I thought he looked an out and out mile and a half horse, whereas Delacroix wasn't quite as sure. And afterwards, you are thinking maybe he will drop back to mile and two, but. Really interesting comments from Aidan, and like we've seen, Camelot going for the Triple Crown and all that, like that's practically unheard of. Like Coolmore Ballydoyle's love and regard for the Derby, whatever it's about, is massive for the race, like absolutely massive. If you took them out, God Almighty, it wasn't a very strong home contention this year.
Yeah, for sure. And I thought it was interesting. Aidan said that the Lambourn might go back and try and do the double with the Irish Derby as well. So that'll add a bit of excitement on the build up for the Irish equivalent. But onto the Fillies Classic next. Again, Aidan O'Brien, Ballydoyle. They have the 1-2 this time. Mini Hawk by Frankel. I was maybe a little bit surprised in the build up to this that she was Ryan's selection, but obviously she was showing an awful lot at home after that Chester performance. She was rated 10 pounds inferior to her stablemate World, who finished second under Wayne Lorden. It was a big performance, Johnny, I thought, for a filly who, was quite an experience coming into the race.
Yeah, I found Aidan has been brilliantly given with he had a great comment about the Coronation Cup winner, Jan Bruegel. He said he would have been the greatest penalty kick ever in the Melbourne Cup. I like comments like that. Unfortunately, Aidan has saved a bit of information maybe on these good Frankel fillies in terms of their work for after the race, because the comment he said, didn't he say about Mini Hawk like that she had kind of turned inside out more or less from Chester, and then he said about Lake Victoria, basically her work after Newmark was out of this world. And next time I'd love if Aidan said that before race, to get, because it's great, like it's great when trainers kind of put their neck on the line a bit before races, and Aidan has done this. Now he mightn't necessarily say it to the media at times, but I do still like hearing comments like that, because you're kind of part of you is still that person who might see this horse work at home and go, geez, that's amazing. And when you hear it in the press, it's kind of class to hear it as well. But Mini Hawk, I mean, for Frankel and for like Wootton Bassett's had a brilliant run in terms of the classics. We're running a blinder here. Mini Hawk was very, very good. It was between the two of them from a long way out. And she looks like a proper mile and a half filly, and another very good Frankel. And it's interesting, this post Galileo world, seeing Wootton Bassett in the share of Henri Matisse, Australian the shape of Lambourn, and two Frankel fillies win classics for Aidan in recent times. I actually laid Desert Flower in the race, Emma, really thinking there was a massive stamina doubt about her. And it was kind of weird, like I was kind of right, but I was wrong. She actually didn't look like she didn't stay at all. But she was off the bridle half a mile out. I was thinking my money's absolutely certain here. But she stayed on well to the extent that I'm kind of wondering, was it more the track that didn't suit her rather than the trip? Because if she were to take on the first two again at a more conventional track, and I'm not sure what their plans are, it might be interesting. But it was a fantastic result for Aidan, and it's interesting now to see these stallions coming to the fore that's in a post Galileo world.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'd agree on Desert Flower. I thought she was my fancy in the race, and it'd be hard to say that it was the trip that beat her anyway. Maybe it was the track; she didn't like the undulations or something like that. But I don't know. She seemed to get home okay, but just never really looked, to show the class that she showed in the Guineas. So I'm not sure where I'll go next with her, but she was a bit disappointing in my book as well. You kind of gave a mention to the Coronation Cup there. Jan Bruegel was very, very good. The Calandigan, I don't know what is it about him. He looked to me, people were maybe slating Michael Barzona a small bit, but I thought he had every chance to go past the winner. He kind of nearly got his nose in front for a stride, and then he said, no, I'm going back again. So I'm not sure where you go with him next, but I didn't think his jockey did a whole pile wrong on the day anyway, Johnny. I'm not sure what you thought about that one.
100%, Emma. Like I actually thought he was I don't think he could have ridden the horse any better, and there was a kind of a question mark. Like Jan Bruegel, for me, he looked, if you're betting in running now, I know he's a stayer, but I mean, Tattenham Corner and so on, you wouldn't have been confident at all. He looked like Brian Moore's body language for me throughout the race wasn't overly persuasive. And I didn't have a bet in it or anything, but I just found it, I was thinking in the market beforehand that there was probably a lot between them in terms of their actual form, because Jan Bruegel's defeat at the Curragh, I think you could say that was kind of fair enough. I wouldn't be ruling too harshly on that. There's a lot of commentary afterwards about his head carriage, and maybe that was built into the price, but he was taking on a horse who's whose form might have been better, but Jan Bruegel has potential to be a better horse this year than he was at 3. And it was a brilliant race to watch. Like, it was absolutely, like, that's what racing is all about. It was kind of like, Jesus, I mean, he's just going to go by here, isn't he? He's going to go by, and he just didn't. Whether he met a horse who, when you're taking on an informed stayer trained by Aidan O'Brien, who's dropped back slightly in trip and who was giving for pressure, it's not easy to go by. And maybe that was the place of, that's what happened with Calandagan. But I thought he was just cajoled beautifully into the race, delivered at the right time, and ultimately wasn't willing enough or wasn't good enough. But a fantastic race to watch.
Yeah, I did enjoy the comments afterwards as well. Definitely not going back for the Melbourne Cup anyway. Once bitten, twice shy there, I'd say. But
well, it's funny with that, isn't it? Because, Willie Mullins wants to win that race so much that I think Willie has gotten a plane to Melbourne to watch a horse work with a view to the Melbourne Cup. And one of the reasons I've never been to Australia is that I don't really want to be on a plane that long, or 2 planes or whatever it is. But he wants to win the race so much that he got a plane. I can't remember the horse, to watch a horse work. But I'd say at this stage, Aidan is like that Melbourne Cup again. I'd say he's just not having it at this stage.
Yeah, I think it was Vauban last year. He went down, he got the plane and straight back up again. some going, yeah. But I'd say now Aidan might be taking his time before he tries to go back there again. But another kind of topic from Epsom over the weekend, lots of chat around on social media. Obviously, neither of us were in Epsom, so it's hard to comment on the crowd and the atmosphere. But on telly, it looked relatively small. I think I saw, I'm not sure was it official figures, but about 22,000 there on Derby Day, which is probably a bit below what you'd expect on the flagship race, I suppose, in UK racing. What did you make of that, Johnny? Is it just a race that's losing its appeal to the public? Is it the way it's being marketed? What would be your take on the whole situation?
Yeah, I was in the back of a car a few months ago, and somebody was on about the Gordon Bennett cycle that takes place, the Gordon Bennett racing that takes place in Kildare, and it was said to me at the time that the numbers seem to be down of British visitors, and the person was saying to me, there is a lot of people in Britain, they're not necessarily able to afford to do the things that they used to do, and I think in Ireland we understate the cost of living crisis in Britain as much as we have one as well in many respects, and the cost of living crisis in Britain is such that people don't necessarily, if they don't necessarily have the money to go to Epsom for pretty eye-watering admission fees, to go to Epsom to see the Derby on a day when the weather was forecast to be kind of off-putting in the first place. And in fairness in racing, the big festivals are generally holding up. We've had problems with Cheltenham and all of that, but the big festivals are holding up. Like you've been to Royal Ascot, that seems to be holding up well. But Epsom, it was grim to see the comparison of the infield. There was a photo put up on X in relation to the infield on Saturday rather, relative to other years, and it was sad. And even the comments under it was this is really grim to see. And Lee Mossad spoke about this in the Race Post. I think this is really on the people in racing in Britain to look at this, because this is an alarming trend downwards. And maybe the Derby isn't the race it was in some respects in terms of British racing, but that's a very, very low figure. And the figure in general across Epsom for the weekend was low, and it is quite alarming. Our classics in Ireland get poor crowds as well, you'd have to say. But Britain, where flat racing has more of a hold of the population, or certainly had, it was an alarming figure. And I'm not sure where they go from here, but they need to improve on that next year.
Yeah, I'd say there's probably a few different things at play. Look, I suppose the weather forecast on the day was I think there was torrential rain forecast, which might have put a few people off, you'd say. But I don't think you can really blame the race itself. I thought on the build up to the race, it looked quality. You had a 2,000 guineas winner. You had a strong Irish challenge coming over. The ticket pricing, I'd say is definitely a factor in it. I think, to get access to the parade rig, I think the cheapest ticket was about £50, which is about €60, which, look, people would say it's a major sporting event, but, I think you could probably lower it a bit more to get people in the door. Looking at the Curragh's meeting for their Irish Derby meeting, I think it's €20 to get in the gate, and we'll see how many they get in there now. But I think that looks like great value. And I don't know, sometimes you feel like the way they market the racing in the UK as well, is it really targeted towards racecourse? Was it a couple of years ago at the Derby, they were leaving off fireworks on the way down to the stand. They're kind of trying to make it into more of a circus than a horse race. And I saw people saying that there was actually literal circus acts going on throughout the day in Epsom, which I don't know, maybe they're just missing the point a small bit. But I'd say probably ticket pricing would be a major factor. Like you kind of mentioned, like the cost of living crisis, people probably just can't afford to go racing on these big days too often anymore. But other news from the weekend, I suppose the big one, Colin Keane has become retained rider for Juddmonte. I suppose, Johnny, it's maybe something people who follow Irish racing have been saying for a long time, that Colin might be underappreciated internationally, but he's getting a big chance here now, a big job. Obviously, Ger Lyons has a lot of horses for Juddmonte here in Ireland, but plenty of rides over in the UK for the likes of John and Thady Gosden and others who'll be going to France, the UK, America. It's a big job for Colin. Got this last night, I think it was.
Yeah, the Irish Field broke this on Sunday night, so it's been a good couple of weeks for the Irish Field. I think it might have been revealed from an email that Kerry Lyons kind of sent to the owners, and I suppose this is befitting Colin's ability. For a guy of his ability, I don't think he's ridden in enough really big races, not ridden in enough Breeders' Cups, and not ridden in enough classics, and that's just how it is. In terms of the opportunities, they haven't really been there. I think with Colin, when the opportunity comes along, you have to take it. And some people said he didn't give White Birch the best ride at the Curragh. And some days you'll have off days, but in general, to me, Colin Keane just does not make mistakes in races. And now he has the opportunity to ride in more races at the top level and become an even better rider. And Ger Lyons has obviously agreed to this, and that's a massive part of it. It's an opportunity now for Gary Carroll as well, who only rode a handful of winners for Ger Lyons last season. Like, Gary would pick up rides for Ger Lyons, and Gary was referenced in Kerry's email, I think. Gary would pick up rides for Ger Lyons, but not that many really fancied rides. Riding a lot of second strings of Gers, which rarely enough win. So this is a big opportunity for him and some other riders when Colin might be away at weekends. And ultimately for Colin, like, this is a great opportunity for him. It's the next kind of path on the ladder towards his own, to reaching the peak of his own career. And it's going to give me a big interest, whatever he's riding in England and abroad, to see how they get on. And he obviously has a good relationship with the guys at Juddmonte, but it is an opportunity for Gary Carroll as well on some Saturdays and Sundays in Ireland to ride good horses for Ger. And very best of luck to Colin. As I say, I think he's the best in the business. He's an absolute pleasure to deal with, really well brought up by his family, and this is the opportunity now, I think, that his talent deserves. And I don't think Ger Lyons is going to suffer much, if at all, from this, because when Gary Carroll is available, Gary's a very good rider as well.
Yeah, for sure. And it must massively open up the Irish Jockeys Championship as well. Obviously, Colin won that for the last number of years. But, you've got the likes of Billy Lee, Chris Hayes, Dylan Brown McMulligan, even Wayne Lorden, they're all kind of within about 10, 15 winners of Colin at the moment. You'd have to say there's a few of them eyeing up their chances here. Would you give any of those a shout to overtake him this year? You'd imagine he's going to miss a few winners at least when he's on those international trips.
Yeah, I suppose when we saw Paul Townend taking outside rides during Punchestown, and ultimately his runner-up to Jack Kennedy, that's a sign of kind of jockeys must in a title race. And I think with title race in Ireland, it becomes a thing when the jockeys realise they have a chance. Like I thought Dylan Brown McMonigal would have maybe gone closer last season, but it just didn't happen for him at this stage. But now you're looking at this news will embolden some of those that you mentioned around Colin. And like, when I think when Billy Lee was going for it, people were really willing him to win it because he's so popular and he's such a good rider. And obviously Colin was had the ace at that stage, but this will give them an opportunity. And as much as a title race is great, like, I think for Colin Keane now, he wouldn't mind giving up the title race if it meant riding more. Now, he's not going to give it up willingly, but the priority for him now, for me, should be riding in the best race around the world for Juddmonte, rather than riding as many winners as possible in Ireland, if that makes sense. And that might make it open, but it's going to be a more intriguing race this season for sure.
Yeah, for sure. It'd be a hard job to turn down, even though it might risk him losing his Irish Jockeys Championship, but he'll have some top class rides, like you mentioned, the likes of Field of Gold, Calpana, and many more. from across the water at least. But a couple of other little bits of news from the last week just came through there in the last maybe half an hour. Lake Victoria ruled out of the Coronation Stakes at Royal Ascot. She'll be a massive loss to the Wild Meeting, Johnny. She was definitely one of the ones I was most looking forward to seeing.
Yeah, this took me a bit by surprise as well. She's been prepared for something later in the season, and she was beaten at Newmarket. But I think it's fair to say if she'd had a clean run of it this season, she would be unbeaten. And her performance at Curra, she's a horse I've always liked. Earlier in her career, she looked quite green, but she's becoming more professional. She's a real turn of foot for a horse that's kind of is bred to stay longer. And it is disappointing for Royal Ascot. I know you enjoyed it immensely over there last year, Emma, and it's something that's on my bucket list, but definitely looking forward to seeing her later in the campaign.
Yeah, for sure. Another one ruled out, Port Fortuna. Unfortunately, he's going to miss her target in Ascot. So two of probably the most exciting fillies in training. It'll be a pity to miss them next week. But it sounds as if they're hoping to get them back for later targets later in the season at least. So hopefully we'll see those two back in action at some stage this year. But Johnny, I think we've chatted about most of the major news topics. Before we wrap up, I'll just ask you: did you see any horse to follow throughout the last 7 days?
I'm actually going to give a horse that ran at Navan. It was an interesting meeting at Navan on Saturday. I suppose to see Red Letter, who had that Guineas form running, really hard market to figure out that's listed Coyunga Stakes, and Barnavara winning, well backed as well for Jessica Harrington. I thought that was a very, very strong listed race, but I'm going to give a horse just on the basis of maybe the jockey as much as anything else, but a couple of aspects to the race. Jack Cleary, some of them, just looking at Aidan O'Brien of late, the Mark Crane, Jack Cleary, he's given plenty of jockeys a chance in Ireland when there's a big day on in England or wherever else. And Jack Cleary claiming 5. He rode Warsaw in that opening maiden. He's a horse by Wootton Bassett, who Aidan was certainly talking up very highly after France. The dam is an unraced sister to forget for Forever Together and Together Forever. I can't even actually pronounce them differently. So it's a hell of a pedigree. The dam is basically exactly the same pedigree as two classic horses. He was 18-1 in the race, so I'm not sure what that was about in terms of Kansas and everything else that was fancied, but I thought he absolutely bolted up. And for a horse with that pedigree over 5 furlongs, albeit at Navan, I thought this horse could certainly go on to better things. Maybe he's just not the flashiest at home, or maybe they looked at his pedigree and said he's not going to win over 5 furlongs. It's a hell of a performance, but didn't look a bad maiden at all.
Very good. I'm going to give one from different but kind of similar connections. I've got the Magners involved as well. Davy Crockett won a Punchestown bumper there for William Mullins. Normally, I suppose this time of year you wouldn't be taking a whole pile of notice of bumper from him. It might be a little bit weaker, but kind of similar to his brother Davy Crockett, out of any power, obviously. Half-brother Mystical Power won a summer bumper as well and headed for the Galway Festival. It sounds as if this fella's going to go down the same route. He was very, very impressive winning in Punchestown on Saturday. Obviously by Camelot. They're going to target Galway again for a novice hurdle. So going the same route as Mystical Power, who obviously went on to be a multiple grade one winning novice hurdler. I think what he was talking about, the likes of a Royal Bonnet down the line. So I'd say Davy Crockett won to put in your tracker and follow.
Love the way he travelled in the race, wouldn't you?
Yeah, God, he was brilliant. I suppose he's bred to be pretty good, so they would have been disappointed if he didn't win that one, I'd say. But we'll wrap it up there, Johnny. I think we're actually no Irish Angle show next week. We're both on for a special Royal Ascot preview along with Stephen Harris next Monday. So we'll be looking forward to that one. But thanks everyone for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the show, and make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content.